strong aspect of our identity and our being, that it is prone to, it is also misused. But through history, we have had huge challenges in addressing this issue, because it has got a negative face to it. But by simply pushing it under the carpet, we are dealing with a huge problem. It is not as if, so there are three aspects to it. One is actually the ability and willingness to address sexuality in the body. That is one. The third is, so I'm problematizing it and proposing some solutions for you to continue thinking, because in this session you can't find all the answers, but you need to think a bit and probably open your minds and start continuing your discussions at home and at studying among your fellowship, etc. The first is the ability and willingness to address sexuality and body. Second is the ability and willingness to accept the other as a precious creation of God. Okay, the other. And the third is the ability and willingness to accept discipline and chastity. So these are three facets I will touch. Now, when I say there's a great challenge in the ability and willingness to address sexuality, please do not think that I'm saying there is no sexuality in Christian. There is too much of it, huge amounts of it, like food. There's a lot of, it is abused because it's one of the strong emotions that people feel. It's used in marketing, it's pushed. So it is not as if we don't talk about intercourse, don't talk about sexual issues, but hardly in our faith context, which is actually a very sad aspect. Because even I have a lot of challenges also with the Greek and the Western interpretation of all these things, how Christianity has moved, because it has been tremendously influenced by the Greek philosophy. Like, take the example of the word love itself. We split hairs on love in Greek language. It is a different hierarchy of love. But in but everything is love. We have to understand that even erotic, love, emotional love, erotic love is part of the precious God-given capacity of love. But we tend to split up all these things, and we tend to give different weights to it. And it's very tough in our tradition to address these issues. So it is talked about most of the times. We don't even mention words, so there are code words in the Bible. But actually the Bible is not censored. So actually going back to the Bible, the ancient ways, it's a very holistic book. But the church and the Christian communities do not read many parts of the Bible in our lectionary. We shy away from difficult texts. Songs of Songs is one book which actually addresses a lot of erotic love, and it's one of the most beautiful books in the Bible, which is not shameful of talking about anatomy but it talks about, it's okay, there are interpretations of it. It's talking about love between God and man, but it also talks about love between a woman and a man. It is very beautiful, but we are so stuck up in many ways that we don't even want to mention it. An interesting example is, 40 years ago, one of my colleagues who worked with Samuel. He was one from Madras. He was my colleague, one of the persons working here recently. He said a very sad story about 40 years ago when he went to Togo. It was in a region where the people traditionally never wear a blouse. Okay? So it was a Sunday morning when the women are coming marching into the church with the blouse on the left armpit and the Bible on the right armpit. So they come to the front of the church and put on the blouse and enter a church where, of course, probably the Christian God does not want to see breasts. And then just recently I saw, I was in northern Italy, where it was so hot, but systematically there was a priest preventing women wearing shorts from entering the church. Because it is not as if God does not want to see the eyes of women. Men were wearing shorts. No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying what is right or wrong. But it's a problem. Us, women need to be all covered up, and if you go, I have done meetings and workshops all over the world where you talk about rape. First thing men say is that women put the blame on the victim. The women are provocative. Be it in Sudan, be it in Delhi, be it in the US, that's the first reaction. The whole, we are not able to deal with the body, we are not able to deal with issues, and we don't want to talk about it. We need to talk about these issues. We need to talk about rape, we need to talk about incest, we need to talk about wonderful sexual relationships. All these things we need to discuss. The Bible talks about rape, the Bible talks about incest, the Bible talks about unspeakable things. It's in the second chapter of Samuel is one of the most painful and most vivid descriptions of the rape of Tamar. She was the daughter of a king, and it is obvious to see how the daughter of a king and how she was raped by her own foster brother, and how the men facilitated that process. The men kept quiet. The men allowed it to happen. But these are lessons that we need to discuss and protect, empower men and women and young people so that they will not be vulnerable to abuse. So I think the answer to that aspect, availability and the willingness to address sexuality and the body, is actually that we provide safe spaces in our congregations, where there is a place for young people and men and women separately, maybe, where we have enough professionals to guide discussions. There are psychologists, there are nurses, there are doctors, there are theologians. Multidisciplinary approach to talk about issues of health, sexual health, mental health, about puberty, even before children become mature. They have to start these discussions when they are age 9, 10. Really much earlier than actually when they become mature, physically mature. And children are not stupid. By the end of 2 years, majority of the brain development is over. So if you think that your children don't understand what you say, you are deluded. Because they are very intelligent creatures. They are just smaller versions of you. So you have to respect them as individuals and allow them and discuss. So safe spaces, when I mean safe spaces, confidentiality, non-judgmental approach. You may have your different values, that's fine. But you cannot condemn people. And you cannot condemn the young, condemn people who are different, etc. So we need to provide safe spaces, informed spaces. If I don't know sufficiently about it, I need to ask for it. And we need to give people the physical and in the faith context, we need to discuss, so what does the Bible say about these issues? This next is the ability and the willingness to accept others as precious creatures. Now, our community is a fantastic community in a way. It is so moral and very strict, very well structured. Values are very good. We are so when among the Syrian Christians, Christians in Kerala, especially of our St. Thomas tradition, adultery and people having many girlfriends is frowned upon. There is no machoism. There are many communities where actually, where you have many relationships, it is seen as macho and a sign of manliness. In our community, in our tradition, it's seen as a weakness, and people look down upon it. So the values are very good and strict. But when I see our young people moving away from their social structures, they don't seem to be behaving very differently from others. You know what I mean? So it is more the social structures that seem to control them, not necessarily their valuing the other. So for example, when I was going for a meeting in Nairobi and to save money for the organization, I selected a cheaper hotel, and when I said, take the hotel, and my colleagues laughed at me. I asked, why are you laughing? So he said, okay, you go there and stay and see. Well, it was near, red light district, which I knew. So I went and stayed, and then I came back and they laughed, and they said, how did you find it? I said, I found it was all right. So there were sex workers there. I don't need their services. I have no problem with them. I have no problem with sex workers. That's what, unfortunately, that's what they're doing. But, they talk to me and I talk to them. So in the sense that, is what is driving us in our behavior? Is it our respect for the other as a human being? And this is where also gender justice comes in. How do you treat women? And I think there's a huge problem for the Christian interpretation and Semitic religion as a whole, how we have actually very selectively read the Bible. When you read the rib, what women created from the rib, there is no word rib. It is a flawed translation. It is actually the side, the most authentic translation in Hebrew and Aramaic and Arabic and whichever early languages. It just means the side. So we have tended to minimize, to trivialize women and to make them sort of an expendable appendage. So, and of course, you can interpret the earlier, as sexuality seen in the realm of property, not to covet your neighbor's donkey and wife, etc. And purity, how are you pure? But all we need to is to look at Jesus. He had a radical interpretation of the Bible. He took none of this, he lifted up the contractual relationship of marriage into a spiritual one. But he doesn't actually disown the contractual responsibility of marriage, but two becoming one. And that's what actually, it is one became two. When God created, and then two becoming one, they become one. And Jesus brings the respect he has for women. When he sat with the woman by the side of the well, with the Samaritan woman, he does not condemn her. He sits at the same level. He provides a safe space to discuss with her about her issues. He does not call her a sinner, but he recognizes her faults and lets go and sin no more. And so and then of course, but you can see throughout history, there is a huge male domination, and in the whole process, we sort of we trivialize women, and without actually taking women seriously, a lot of our discussion of sexuality does not come into fruition. It's critical. This is extremely critical, and I can go on and on about this, but it is very, very revealing how Jesus discussed, and how open he was, and how humble he was, and how willing he was to accept rebuke, accept the love and the respect and the interaction with women. So this is one important aspect. So I think that this does mean a radical reinterpretation of relationships. How are you? So in marriage, you are not necessarily finding the right partner, but also being the partner. So in the sense, try to, for both men and women, to see how you can sort of, and respecting each other. And of course, sexuality to be seen as a part of the spectrum of a relationship. It cannot be truncated and commodified. You cannot just do sex and relationship. And this is a kind of, it's part of a continuing of your relationship, and a very precious relationship. And it doesn't mean that this has to be uniformly in all relationships. It is a very precious aspect, a precious type of relationships. Then I think the third aspect is the ability and the willingness to accept discipline and chastity. We can, I do respect all different perspectives, different ideas. I think it is very important that we should never be judgmental to whoever whatever morals. But we have to apply the strictest of rules according to what Jesus said in our lives. So, rather than expect it from the rest of the world, apply it on ourselves. And I think the ability to accept discipline and chastity is the thing I think we extensively mentioned about in the morning, is following Jesus, being in the presence of God, acknowledging God. So it's not enough to be in the presence, but we need to acknowledge that we are in the presence of God, be aware of it. Seeing the world and living the life in the light of God. See, they were mentioning about this, but it is not in a judgmental sort of standing on a pedestal, I am better than you and I am much better and you are all more. No. Because, sexuality is an aspect of morality, but there are many aspects of morality that we have to talk about. Greed, and St. Paul talks about the various immoral things, he talks about homosexuality and that and this, but there are many other things there. But we tend to focus on one. It's about greed, about avarice, and getting angry with each other. So we have to see it in that perspective. So, it is, I have, of course, very liberal views in many of these issues. But I am not liberal with myself. I think we have to be extremely clear when you follow Jesus. And one thing, I became a practicing Christian when I was 22 as a medical student. And I decided to follow Jesus, and I actually read the Sermon on the Mount. And I still am thrilled to be his disciple after 25 years. Because I think it's a very practical and a very powerful teaching. So when he talks about, about the not to look at people with lust, because you've already committed and don't call somebody a fool that you've already killed. He's talking about the mind, he's talking about removing the thoughts, all the discussions in the morning. So the issue of discipline and chastity is very important. Chastity is not necessarily celibacy, but being chaste is about the quality of your character. And so we do preserve. But at the same time, we have to accept others as they are and accept their situations. So I am speaking like this because I was born in a wealthy family. I had the wonderful opportunity, good parents, sent to the best school, so I can speak all these things. But I can never judge a person who had, probably had difficult circumstances or challenges. We don't know what the other person faced. So even in issues of sexuality, we have to be very, very careful when we look at the other and we judge the other. But we need to set standards. And we need to show these standards to our children, but at the same time, give them the possibility to discuss all the issues that are there today about different orientation, about different types of sexuality, different, all the different complexities about masturbation, all these things that nobody incest. We need to discuss these issues. And it should be discussed in an environment where people know, there is confidentiality, that people are able to depend on our advice. So there needs to be safe spaces in our communities. So in the context of our faith, we can deal with it. Because now it is not. It is all dealt with the mass media, a click of the mouse, and there are a lot of issues that we are avoiding. So in fact, if I look at our churches, I see the carpets bulging. Our faith communities are bumpy with issues swept under the carpets. It's all like mountains. On surface, everything is nice, clean, and vacuum clean, but it's very bumpy. We cannot afford to do it. We have to face it. Because the sexuality, women's sexuality is part of our being. It's a wonderful aspect. Like the yeast, it can be very bad. Like the knife, it can be used to cut butter, it can be used to kill. Like money, it can be used to help, it can be, it can be used to buy people, sell people, etc. Same way with sexuality, same way with our food, everything. We have to strengthen, like what Seema mentioned about the song. We have to see it in the light of our faith. Not in judgmental terms, but in a very clear way what is the right path. So I think it is important. So at the end, I hope that, after this conference, you give thought to it. That your children are also sexual beings. That they are not just, just because they are Malayali, Suryani, Christiani, that they are asexual, sort of two-dimensional. You can put them into a book, like you can't. They are human beings. They have needs. They have challenges. The best you can do is to make them informed in the context of our faith, and let them know what the responsibilities they have. And you, as parents, have to take that responsibility which you cannot expect from them by living life, which is a good example, and also giving them possibility to discuss and to have a good interaction among their peers. Thank you.
If anyone has ever watched television with your parents, American television, you know that moment when the show is about to have an intimate moment between a man and a woman, and you look to your mother and to your father and you change the channel. That uncomfortable moment, we like to thank Dr. Manoj for giving us that same uncomfortable moment today. But it is a necessary uncomfortable moment that is that we are discussing here today, and Dr. Manoj has given us a very good reason why, and he's brought up some very interesting points of why this is a very critical topic for us. So at this time, we will open up the floor for questions. There's a question back there.
Can I come over? Well, thank you, Dr. Manoj, for that wonderful deliberation. And in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, Juliet says one thing while a friar is trying to help her. She says, what a friar would know about love. I don't know, many of you will be thinking why I am here. But I really appreciate the topic has been opened up. I would like to highlight a few points, if I could take a couple of minutes, especially in terms of the tradition that we represent. If I say that the attitude of the Augustinian West with those kind of terminologies may be far too theological, but let me put it this way. The attitude and the interpretation of human sexuality of the Latin West of 5th century and the Greek and Syriac East of the 5th century were poles apart. I have personally read documents of 3rd and 4th century giving positive attitudes to human sexuality from Christian monks. Especially when the Latin West has taught, following the tradition of Augustine, sex for the reproductive reasons, when it is considered as something acceptable. Sex between married couples for non-reproductive reasons, for their pleasure or whatever it is, considered as venial sin, that is pardonable sin, and sex outside the wedlock is considered as unpardonable sin. But the Eastern fathers whom I was referring to considered sex as the consummation and overflowing of and a shadow of eternal love of the creativity of God, which was quite positive. And again, especially the Cappadocian fathers, Basil, Gregory of Nyssa, and Gregory Nazianzen, they considered creation as an outcome of the overflowing love of God, which essentially reflect on the Eastern Church's attitude on sex. And moreover, even coming to the point of the attitude towards women, which has to be highlighted again. Gregory Nazianzen, a Greek church father of 4th century, he was giving an interpretation of St. Matthew chapter 19, where chastity is is discussing, is in question, and he says, his interpretation, one of his theological orations, he goes like this. Well, if a woman commits fornication, commits adultery, that is becoming a punishable sin in your community, and the man is exempted. And a person who has lived 1,600 years ago, he further goes like this. I would not respect your law, because your law has been created by men. It is not considering women. In the 1960s, only in the Western world, the feminist theology started coming out with the reflections on human sexuality in this way, that the laws, all the jurisprudence have been created by men but not considering the women. So this is an outlook that our early church fathers have had, and this is something positive and we ought to be highlighting as a church. And again, coming back to my Malayali culture, especially getting back to my own place, living there for 3 years, I would say, with due respect, no, it is my own culture. I lose respect of my culture because of the attitude of men, especially when we are traveling in public transport to the women. They look down. That is not up to the mark. We are a sexually deprived community as men in India that I see, which is bad. I respect the people in here with the different attitudes. Because a girl was raped to death in a running train, and she was pushed down and she passed it. That is obviously an event that ought to be condemned. But what upset me is that a group of people were talking about it. And then the remark was like this from a gentleman, a respectful gentleman: it is good that she died. Then I asked, why, for what reason? Because nobody is going to marry her. It annoyed me. I became furious about this. If this is that a mistake of the girl, that has happened? That is where Dr. Manoj has came up with the right point that we, in India, many places, even in 21st century, women have been viewed as commodities, which is bad. At least when we start developing a theology for the tangible body, because we believe in the bodily resurrection of the transformed body. This has been acknowledged by the 2nd and 3rd century church fathers, acknowledging there is a participation for body in eternity. It's a transformed body. So we ought to honor body equally between men and women. So indeed, this is a very valid topic for all of us to talk aloud, especially before our youngsters, to develop a newer perspective for ourselves and for others. Thank you very much for Dr. Kurian for that wonderful message. Thank you.
Is there any other question?
From a Christian and scriptural perspective, how would you view homosexuality? Would you view it as a sin, a crime, a disorder, or a normal variation? By the way, let me clarify, I'm not gay.
What I'm saying is of course strictly not reflecting in your organization or WCC or a church. As a doctor, I think it is a variation behavior. It is not because you see you understanding that there has been huge changes in the last 40 years. Theologically, let's talk about theology in the last. Physiologically, legally, ethically. Until the 1970s, it was seen as a mental disorder. I personally think it is a variation I'm not saying there is a tendency to think that all gays and all lesbians can be changed, forced to change. Maybe some of them, but I think it is a variation in people, the way how people are brought up and how they think. So in the sense, I mean, from the Bible, of course, it is not in the text. Strictly, it is not acceptable. But there are many things that are not acceptable, and there are many things that are acceptable. Like slavery is acceptable, in the ancient text, etc. So I would distance myself as a person that we should not put all our efforts to decide what is right and wrong, and because even in the remotest village in Africa, this is a big issue. And when I discuss, what is your problem? There are gays. Then I have some half an hour to 1 hour of discussion. Then I said, what is actually your problem? I mean, you mean to say there are gays of abusing, and then it will come out actually infidelity, child abuse, incest, rape, sexual violence against women. There are about 21 things which comes before gay issues. So I think I am not going to rights and wrongs, but it has become a smokescreen for people to get on with all the nonsense and try to deflect the discussion into one aspect of human sexuality. It is one aspect of human sexuality, homosexuality. There are many, many ways in which we are relating to live properly. And of course, if there are a couple of people, living and they're not hitting each other, killing each other, I mean, what is your problem? Why are you killing them? And I'm not saying what is right and wrong. I'm saying we have to be a little bit non-judgmental on these issues. And medically, scientifically, not theologically, legally, it is changing hugely. But of course, we get perturbed and disturbed by the kind of very aggressive, activism of gays and lesbians and all that. But it's a huge challenge, because when people are oppressed, people feel that they are under, they push very hard. So it's sometimes irritating. But that's my perspective. I hope